Hello, world. My name is Daniel Marnie Elkins, and you are watching Talk About It, a show in which we talk with members of the community about the opioid epidemic and how it impacts lives all across the board. I am joined here today by someone I've had the privilege of knowing and working with for the last couple of years, Mr. Jeremy Moore from More Than Fitness. Mr. Moore, Jeremy, could you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you ended up here today?
Yeah. My name is Jeremy Moore, like Daniel said. I run an after-school program for high school students that's based around the weight room, but embedded in that is a social-emotional learning curriculum. And my students often refer to me as Coach Moore. That's sort of my alter ego when I'm working with my students. I grew up here in Wilmington, Delaware, right around the corner from the community center where we're currently recording. I went to the local high school. I was an average student. I did enough to get by. When I was in high school, I had interest in being a police officer. And as a result of that, I didn't want to get in any trouble. So when high school students were doing high school things like drinking and smoking pot, even when I was in high school, it was sort of the beginning of the raid your mom's pill closet era. I wasn't doing any of that. And that sort of became a part of my personality. It was like a way that people knew me. I would drive everybody home from the parties. By the time I was a senior, like nobody even offered me drinks or drugs or pot or whatever, because everybody knew that I didn't do that. And I carried that on for a while. I went to college. I had some difficulties with that. I didn't challenge myself enough in high school, so by the time I got to college and the expectations were a little higher, I couldn't really hang. And at that point, I was sort of a little bit lost. I didn't know what to do or where to go. The only real option that had been presented to me was college, and honestly, I didn't even really want to do that. Mm-hmm. So I found myself at 21 years old, sort of unsure about my future and what I was going to do. And I had always had an interest in the military. My parents are, their formative years were in the 70s. My uncle was a Vietnam veteran and struggled with opioid addiction, as many Vietnam veterans did. And that ended his life early. And as a result, they were not supportive of when I would bring up the military. But as I got older and I was more separated from my family and from the community, it was really, it really came alive that was what I wanted to do. And so I did. I joined the Army. I was a human intelligence collector, so I did interrogations and some other stuff with the Army. And when I went through my basic training and advanced individual training, I was like, oh, here I am. I'm home. This is what I want to do. This is a world of structure, and I know what my expectations are. I performed pretty well at my job, which gave me the opportunity to go to some more advanced schools and get some fancy stuff to put on my uniform, which of course everybody loved. And I did everything I could from the time I got in to deploy. That was what I wanted to do. The war in Afghanistan was going on, and there were people who were going and risking their lives in service of the country. And that was what I wanted, or at least, at that point, what I thought I wanted. So I deployed to Afghanistan. I performed pretty well on deployment. I got a lot of respect from my peers. I remember my training, and we were engaged in a pretty active area, I guess is the appropriate euphemism. There was a lot of conflict going on where we were. And at about 9 months into my deployment, I was injured pretty pretty severely. I fell 60 feet, had a spinal cord injury, broke some bones in my legs, broke some bones in my, broke a ton of bones, hurt my shoulder. And essentially what happened is that I was unable to walk without assistance. And that was, at first being carted around in a wheelchair, which then turned into a cane. And along with that came pills to manage my pain. So Percocet and Oxycontin were part of my daily life. And obviously, being someone who likes to follow the rules and feels good in a structured environment, at first I took them when I needed them. And they did get rid of the physical pain. I also numbed the psychological pain.
Now, did it matter, and did it make a difference that you were actually being given these pills by the system itself, right? Because you had been offered these types of pills throughout your entire youth, but then it was the system that you had embraced the structure of that was then being the ones to actually hand deliver these medications to you.
Of course, yeah, that was the reason that I took them, right? Because they were prescribed to me by the doctor, and also because my pain was real. It was a very real thing that was happening to me. And at that phase in my injury and my recovery, my life would have been impossible to do. It would have been impossible to do anything. It would have been impossible to do physical therapy. It would have been impossible to do all of it. And so, of course, that didn't feel like it felt when someone was, offering me some pill that I didn't know anything about it. It came in a very nice bottle with my name on it and a prescription and a dose. And so that felt very different. But ultimately, like so many other people's stories, at some point, it became not as much about managing my pain. It became more about managing my psychological challenges. It became more about, like, the only time that I feel good is when I'm taking these pills. And so in the beginning, it was not taking my morning med and toughing it through, and not taking my afternoon med and toughing it through, and then taking it all at night, or not taking for multiple days, or like losing pills and needing to get more. And that hold was very real. It was very strong. I was lucky that I was in the Army, that I was in a structured environment, and that the opioid epidemic had begun to happen. This was in 2012. So people were recognizing it, people were talking about it, and I said to my doctors, I don't want to take these anymore. Like, these are starting to scare me. I was right at the cusp of, like, completely jumping over the edge with those pills. And my doctors put me on a program to step down, and I was definitely at a place that it was easier to manage my physical pain. It was still very challenging. I was still in a tremendous amount of pain. But there was also some pride connected to, like, I know that people get addicted to this thing. I didn't get addicted. I didn't get addicted. And I recognized it, and I got over it. So, like, I'm good. I got this. I got this thing licked. And very shortly after the pills went away, alcohol just took its place. Right? I could get that same effect. It was legal. It was, everybody else was doing it. The military is a drinking culture. And I'm fairly confident that had I never had that experience with opioids in the beginning, and that incredibly terrible feeling that you get when you take those, then I wouldn't have had my introduction into alcohol. And since then, since 2012, I have struggled, and I still continue to struggle with sobriety and with addiction, I am in a very good place now with supports that, I work a program and I have people that help me to work that program appropriately. But over the last 11 years, there are years that have been wasted in my addiction. There are relationships that have been completely missed out on. There are relationships that I have damaged that I'm still working to repair. There was opportunities for me to be more of service. I mean, my program is all about being of service to young people, and I try not to live in like regret and how the past could have been, but it would be naive to ignore the time that ultimately was stolen from me, that I allowed to be stolen, whatever language you want to use. That time is gone, and that is gone as a result of this addiction. And I believe that, it started with that first pain med.
So, as someone you are a combat veteran, you have been decorated for your service. You are someone who now serves within a community to help uplift and empower the next generation by giving them the type of structure that you lacked as a teen and then sought out. And then several of your students have even gone on to join the armed services afterwards as well, following in your footsteps. So you are a role model, and I know that the veterans that I am friends with get wary around the word hero, but to these kids that I've seen you with, you are someone that they look up to. So it's important for our viewers to be able to understand that anyone can get addicted. And that's something I've heard you say in your speeches, that you thought you were someone who had the ability and the self-discipline and control, but yet given this situation, and it was a situation that, you didn't choose to get injured, right? You did so in the service of our country. And so it's important to understand that. So in looking at where you are now, is part of what you do designed to try and provide that discipline and structure that's oftentimes lacking?
Of course. Yeah. And before I answer that, I do want to talk a little bit about what you just said, right? I do, and I have throughout my entire life had a level of discipline that was, very high, and it's something that I've been very proud of. Throughout my physical recovery, I had the prognosis was not always that great, and I had to work through that, and I spent hours and hours and hours on my recovery. I woke up many early mornings and went to bed many late nights working to improve my physical recovery. When I found this opportunity sort of by accident, when I was made aware of the level of impact that I could have on teenagers, I worked tirelessly at being able to build that program and being able to be a role model to that, the idea of how my students view me and the idea of probably how you view me. I want to live up to that. I want to be that person. However, throughout those entire 11 years, while I was presenting as a disciplined and structured and, very focused person, privately and silently, I was struggling in this area of my life where discipline and focus and self-drive and willpower were not enough to be able to overcome. The hold of addiction is strong. And like I have said before, anybody can become addicted. It is not about a lack of character. It's not a lack of moral fiber. I think on paper, I'm one of the people that should not get addicted. I'm one of the people that meets these criteria. Okay, this person should be able to manage that challenge objectively. But that's not the case. And in my experience, there are many other people at all levels of socioeconomic status, at all areas of the world that do all sorts of jobs, from judges to the guy that pumps your gas at the gas station. The thing that they have in common is that circumstances in life put them in a position where they became addicted to something, and it really, I think we're getting better at addressing that stigma, that, like, you know, the addict or the alcoholic is the guy that's on the street, you know, begging for money or struggling. But that's not the case.
It's true. Well, and I think it's part of the reason why we need to talk about it, and it's the destigmatization of substance abuse disorder and the recognition that it is a disease, and it's a disease that can be managed, but much like cancer, there are things that you can do to help reduce your risks. There are things that you can do to help increase your health surrounding if you have been diagnosed with cancer. But it is not something that you can just decide to have go away. It might go into remission, but then it is something that is ever present.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And to address the question that you asked earlier, while my program's sole focus is not a opioid prevention program, it's not a drug prevention program, but those characteristics that limit your, you know, first of all, limit your exposure, and second of all, limit your vulnerabilities to this crisis that we're having in our country, those are the tenets, the principles of my program. Understanding how to face failure, to fail, and to dust yourself off and get back up. Building up confidence that you are at least willing to try something that is going to be hard, that's going to be difficult, and then to watch the students overcome it. That is something that I think teenagers are lacking, right? Like, I couldn't do this, I did this work, and then I did this. That repetition builds the confidence of being able to look at situations, think you can't do it, then do the things that you need to do to be better prepared to be able to accomplish it, and then accomplish it. And then on top of that, all of my program is, another pillar of our program is meditation, where I run a guided meditation after every workout, where the students are forced to sit with their feelings. You know, my initial entry into opioids was to address physical pain, but as I said earlier, it also addressed emotional pain that I had. And I know that the emotional pain that teenagers nowadays feel is just as intense as the emotional pain that I felt returning from deployment. It is all relative. And giving them a place to be able to vent their frustrations and their anger, to be able to build some of that self-confidence, and then while the dopamine and serotonin is in their brain after a workout, to sit and to watch their thoughts, to have some space between that voice that says that you can't do it, that voice that says that you're not going to amount to anything, the voice that says it's going to be like this forever, the narrative of being a failure, of being depressed, of having anxiety, of whatever those things are. There's so much exposure to mental health problems now that I think some of my students sort of latch on to that, like, oh, somebody on TikTok talked about having anxiety. That sounds like something that I feel. So I have anxiety now. And then they've like trapped themselves with that label of having anxiety.
Self-diagnosis.
Yeah, exactly. And creating an environment for them to be able to sort of zoom out.
And get a new perspective. And on that, you have recently founded a Camp Conquer, that is operating out of North Wilmington, that it will be focusing on helping the youth in a bunch of different ways. And we attended an event that just happened the other day there that is related to the opioid epidemic. Could you share a little bit about what that event was and then the impact it had upon the youth?
Yeah, so Daniel approached me a few months ago and asked if they could use a piece of our property to plant some flowers, and that was sort of the introduction. And I love Daniel and trust what he says, so I was like, sure, plant the flowers. Yes, you got it. Here's your space. And as we talked more about what it was and what the cause was, I felt better and better about that. We planted tulips, one tulip for every Delawarean who has died from an overdose from the opioid epidemic. And we had an event where we sort of dedicated that garden. The tulips are nice and beautiful right now. It's nice to see when you drive right into the building or drive right into the property. And I had a workout that morning, and my students came up to attend the ceremony, and a few people spoke, and I talked about my experience with addiction and with opioids. And one of the things that I said is that I think it was just over 500 tulips that we planted. And one of the things I said is we could have filled the entire field with tulips if we opened it up to people who had died as a result of the opioid epidemic, not directly because of overdoses, but the mental health crises that come along with that, the physical health crisis that come along with that, those people who feel like they have no other option and they choose to take their own life, and the list goes on and on and on. And I spoke in front of my students pretty openly about my experience and said a lot of similar things to what I said today, like at various points of my career when I was not working at all and focusing on my physical recovery, to when I was beginning to re-enter the workforce and find success, to when I founded a nonprofit, to when the nonprofit became successful. I was struggling in and out of addiction with that. And after the ceremony was over, the students all went back down to the gym. And of course, they just like forget that I'm listening to them talk all the time, and they're talking amongst themselves. And as we were walking down the hill, one of them said to their brother, actually, that was really heavy. Like that was a lot. I don't know how I feel about that. And in my head, I'm smiling a little bit, right? This is something that now they're seeing in front of their face. Something that is helping to give them a new perspective, something that is making them understand the gravity of that snap, split second choice that could have real impacts on their life. They continued to talk amongst themselves about their general lack of awareness that there was an opioid epidemic, that there were regular people like me. I mean, like you said, they probably wouldn't describe me as regular. They have me up on a pedestal, that someone like me could struggle with addiction in that way. And the tone, when we went back to clean up all of our equipment, was very reflective, which is something that I try and foster inside of that building. But it was different than normal. And I really think that the image of 500 flowers being planted to represent 500 lives was huge in zooming out.
And Because you talked about it, they talked about it, and then our community began to think about it. And I think that is why we do what we do. Thank you so much for your time. If you'd like to learn more about what Coach Moore does, you can go to morethan.fitness, which is their website. Once again, it's morethan.fitness. It'll be at the bottom of the screen here. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Talk About It.